Welcome.
You're welcome. I'm off it. My shirt. Are you scared? It's a lot. Good morning and welcome to the part 2 of the Virtual Urban Experience 2K20 Town Hall Series Across the Decades, presented by the Youth World Education Project in partnership with Community College, Maricopa Community College, and the Burton Family Foundation. My name is Tyreek Daniels and I will be your host today. Now, if you have any questions or any statements, please share them in the chat box and they'll be addressed during the Q&A at the end. Now, YWP's mission is to bridge the gap between parental involvement, education, and workforce development with a system of supports that prepares youth to compete in the global economy and build social skills, resiliency, and self-sufficiency. The message of the Urban Experience 2K20 Forum is to bring awareness through education, empowerment, and inspiration with the focus intentionally to move towards accountable actions as a community to advocate for the policies and system changes that are disproportionate for Black people. Today's moderator is Tyrell Daniels, who is the lead ambassador for the Youth World Education Project and community youth activist. Our panelists include Ms. Yvonne Pipkin, who is the Vice President of the RAL Sales Associates, Mr. Steve Browning, co-founder and president of the Fathers for Scholars, Professor Dr. Vernon Joseph, who is the founder of Product Business, Civility, and Live to Produce. We also have Charlie Jackson, who is a social service provider and youth community activist streaming all the way in from Florida. We have Mr. George Charles III, who is the founder of the Unapologetically Intentional Life Coaching and Director of Educational Activities for Project Alpha. And last but not least, we have Ms. Dejanay Williams, who is the CEO of the Key to the Puzzle Entertainment. Now again, we have some questions, and please save them for the end for the Q&A. And now let's get this thing started. How's everybody doing today?
Outstanding.
Awesome.
I know it's early, so. All right, so just to get started, I just would like to ask a couple questions. What do you feel are the top issues facing the Black community right now?
Very interesting
Anyone.
question. Depends on who wants to go first.
Yes.
Well, I'll go ahead and get it started then. One of the areas I would say is definitely what we would call economic stability, mental health, when you're dealing with anxiety, depression, and even shame. Perception, racism, whether it's social cravings or social devastation, and of course, medical and many other issues. I'd love to hear from those who are out there on live stream if you have additional things, but just those are a few things that I would say are the top issues facing Black people in the world today.
Absolutely.
I'll go next. I think, obviously, hunger and poverty is a big one. We hear a lot about mass incarceration. That's a problem as well. Our education is lacking in our community. Not knowing who we are, I think, is really a big one. Mm-hmm. Health sense, especially, asthma is a real problem in our community for young people. Mm-hmm. And the lack of health care is a real problem with us. So that contributes to a lot of the issues that we face today.
Absolutely.
Unequal, I have to agree, which was said earlier, is that unequal earning capacity. That whole idea of not being able to make a living and take care of your family affects all of these issues. So I would say, to me, the most striking one is the unequal earning capacity.
Okay. I actually have to agree with the panelists as well. Those are the key issues in our community, but I think the root to each one of those categories is communication and trust. Because one thing that we don't have as a community is that we don't communicate with one another. We don't talk through our issues. We don't talk through financial resources. We don't talk to any resources that we have available with each other. And we also have a trust barrier amongst us as well, whether it's young and old, dark skin versus light skin, anything like that. We don't trust one another to even provide the education necessary to do anything. So I think if we can get to the root of being able to, hey, let's have an open forum like we have right now and communicate with each other and trust one another to actually be honest and say, this is what we're going to do next, and actually follow through on the plan, all those things can get taken care of if we just end those two core problems that we have within our community. Because anybody can learn financial resources. Anybody can learn how to get over mental health issues just by going to someone within that field. But you have to be able to trust the process. You gotta trust the person that you're gonna be talking to. So if we can communicate and we can trust one another, we can heal our community all together in each category. Just my opinion.
Well said.
Well, yeah, I agree totally with that.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Since I heard in the last comment, light skin, I thought I would jump in. And you gotta represent where you gotta represent, right? And, but I really wanted to, I think everything on my list has been checked off by the panelists so far. I'm not sure if the judicial system is mentioned. I heard mass incarceration, which are all part of the same ills that we're facing right now. And we have been. The other thing that I don't believe I heard was just the disconnect, breakdown of the generational strength of the family, the Black family. As a father, as a grandfather, husband of 30 plus years, family means quite a bit to me. I saw the generations I came up with back with, in the 60s and 70s, and family unit was huge in progress of the Black community and Black people. But I'm unfortunately not seeing that continue on as a tradition. So that's what I would like to add.
Can I jump in with you guys on? I'm sorry, Charlie, I apologize. You guys mind if I jump in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
A lot of the things that everybody is saying, but I think there's some intangibles that are missing as well. Discipline. I think that's a huge one that's missing from our community. Because not a lot of people, especially when you look at different generations, understand the true value of being disciplined. And like one of the panelists said, trusting the process, right? You have to learn how to trust the process. Being consistent. There's not enough consistency that we see within our community that is unfortunate because people are so quick to say, oh, I want to jump on this, and then when it gets, the rubber meets the road, so to speak, people want to back away, and they don't want to constantly push themselves. We have so many people that are judgmental within our community as well. And there's not enough people that are willing to look back and reach back and help the next generation and push them forward. As I've heard many people say before, you have a generation or all of the leaders have died, but I don't think that's the case. We are not finding ways to actually give the generations to come the specific tools to help them learn how to be able to and strengthen the tools in today's society. What might have worked in a society before us or a generation before us might not help the next leaders of tomorrow. And so we have to be able to also identify those things as well. Resources, of course, they're lacking. And then the push for the building of the Black community, pouring into the Black businesses and things of that nature as well, and being able to give back. We have so many people that want to have the handout but not work, continue to grow. As I think Mr. Steve said about the Black families. We don't push ourselves to, evolve the Black families enough to take the next step. And then once we do, well, mass incarceration happens. So the Black father is taken out of the home, and then the Black mother's left to fend and take care of her child and having to work 2 or 3 jobs and things like that. And so the bases have been lost because times have changed, but I think it's been strategically put for those times to change as well. So that's all I'd like to add.
Okay. One thing that I tend to do is I tend to dissect when I'm asked a question. And I hear the term Black community often said. And it's often used as if we are a monolith. And someone who was born in New York, who now currently lives in North Florida, I can tell you this, that what Black Americans in North Florida are experiencing are almost totally different to what someone growing up in New York City is experiencing. The type of poverty that African Americans living in rural areas, oh my goodness, it's honestly, that would be its own segment amongst itself. The lack of resources, healthcare, educational attainment, it's on a level that it's very difficult to explain. And another thing that I want to say is that all of the issues that you all identify, they're dead on. But they're not exclusive to the African American community. As a social worker working with Caucasian families, working with Hispanic families, working with Asian families, every single thing you identified, almost to the exception of the issue with the judicial system, it almost all applies to everything that I'm seeing going on with families. And the one thing that I see unites us is the socioeconomic status. But amongst us, amongst African Americans, the rates of all of the things that you mentioned, they're so disproportionate for us. And we all know the answer to that, and it goes back over 400 years. You know, when you have Asian Americans coming into this country, there's a foundation that's already laid. When you have Hispanic Americans coming into this country, there is a foundation that has already been laid through cultural and tangible aspects that you just mentioned. And with us, what is our culture? Our name is not our own. The language we speak is not our own. The religion we practice is not our own. So who are we? How do we find ourselves? With everything about who we are was given to us from someone else. So the issues that we face is so much deeper. And I like the word you used, intangible, because when you are dealing with the things that are intrinsic, that can change everything around you, all the environmental factors. So we have to deal with the self-esteem, we have to deal with the self-hatred, we have to deal with the lack of self-love amongst ourselves, that feeling that Black person gets when they look in the mirror and they see themselves. Do they see someone who can rise above? Do they see someone who can accomplish? Do they see someone that can do those things? And if they don't see that, all those other things that we mentioned, they're insignificant. We have to get a part of it. And I'm just glad that I had the opportunity to speak with all of you, because everything we all hit upon was set on, and I just wanted to share my little perspective.
Exactly. Well, those are all good points. I like how mainly what everybody talked about is community and how we do things for the Black community, and our family is what's really important. Mental health, the justice systems, all that. But what does the word community really mean to you guys? Because we look like from our community on like compared to their community. My bad.
I'll go first. I don't think, based upon all that I've read and what I've seen, is that we actually, as African Americans or Black, whatever term you want to be called, we don't have a community anymore. We live in neighborhoods. We used to have communities.
Exactly.
In the 60s, we had communities. And those communities had laws or unwritten rules that everybody knew what they were. I lived in a community where everyone knew me, I knew everyone. I could be chastised by those individuals. They told my parents. I had to suffer the consequences of whatever that action was that I did. My community in particular, I grew up in a still town, 26,000 people. It was a segregated community, but I knew who I was because my community embraced me. They gave me my self-esteem. That goes back to the whole family unit thing, that's why it's so important for us to have a family, because your family gives you your identity. And so having lived in a community, I realized how important that was for me, because when I left that community, I felt there wasn't anything that I could do And I was never told that I couldn't do a thing because I was a girl. My parents never told me I couldn't do something. They always told me to go for it. So that's my take on community, is that I don't believe we have communities any longer.
I like how you said they told you there's nothing that you can't do. So think about our generation now when we don't have the community, and the only thing that our teens do here is that what you can't do. You can't do this, and we don't have that support that says this is what you can do. There's nothing that you can't do, and so it's easy to fall into negative things. It's easy to fall into just the lack of bad leadership. So moving forward, like what type of leadership is needed for our community and for our teens?
Before we can get into leadership, in my generation, I kind of will have to disagree, because to me, community is the family outside of the bloodline, because your family is the family that you're born into. But a lot of us, we don't have our foundation anymore, because in your generation, family was important. Like your best friends would be your siblings, you know, like your cousins and stuff. Like everybody was always together. So my family, we're originally from Little Rock, Arkansas. And my grandmother has 12 brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. So they grew up on a land where they're all best friends, would just all be to each other. They would all do the chores together. They were all going to the fields together. They were all sew together, things of that nature. Now we don't have that strong family anymore. Our family consists of maybe 3 kids, 4 max. You know, so we don't have that huge thing. So when you go out into the world and you go to schools, you go to work, you go to programs or community centers, your family is the people that you build outside of that, and that's what makes you a community. And that's what we have now. And I will also have to say, when it comes to not being told you can't do anything, we're more being told to just take the safe route. No. Don't be an entrepreneur. Go ahead and just go get an education, because that's really what you're gonna need. No. Don't invest in that product right now. Just go ahead and go directly. Just go ahead and get a job. Just go do this. Not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, because they really want you to be structured. They want you to be secure in life, but it stops you from having that individual personality come out. So I would say when you think of community, you think of the people that's outside of the home, because in our generation, we really don't get that support, and there's a lot of mistrust when it comes to talking to your mom, talking to your dad, talking to your uncles. There's sibling rivalry that's outside of this world right now. So I would say when it comes into leadership, you just have to find people that you identify with. So I might not be able to talk to my mom, but then I have my advisors from school that I talk to about everything. Or vice versa, when it comes to some of the male teenagers or some of the male young adults, they don't have a dad in their life, but they have a coach. Right. They have something of that nature, or just somebody that they go to at the local gym that they can just talk to, or a fitness instructor. A lot of men do gym and stuff like that. So you just have to consider, it's not necessarily what you're born into, but just you're surrounded in the people that make you feel loved, the people that make you feel welcome. That's community.
You know, it's interesting as we talk about across the decades, because this is what you're getting to see right now. Mm-hmm. When you utilize that word community, really break that word down. Right. Community should mean common unity. Right. That's what it should be. It's not just your family unit. It's not just the people who are on your block or within your circle or even in the same continent as you. Community means what is the common unity that you have. For me, you know, I grew up, my parents are actually from Haiti. Right? I grew up in Miami, Florida. I was born in Georgia, so I'm a little bit of here, a little bit of there, a little bit of everywhere. But I find common unity with those who have the same like-mindedness as me. Now, do they have to believe like me? Do they have to vote like me? No, it's common unity. Right. So as we look at our community and we begin to talk about leadership, leadership is a person who is leading the ship. But what people must understand about leadership is at some point you have to become the mentee. Mentors become mentees in some area because we don't know everything. But what you can do is be the best at who you are and show up for those who need you. Common unity is bringing your best to the table and making sure that you're laying a path and a foundation for those before you, those alongside you, and those behind you. Because there are times when you, even though you may be younger, you're going to teach the older generation. There are times where those who are walking alongside you, your peers, will learn from you and you will learn from them. But there are also times as a common unity that you are forging the path and leaving a legacy for those behind you.
Right, and that's absolutely correct, because whether you think you're doing it or not, or you're proactively doing it or not, just by you being who you are, you never know who's watching you.
Absolutely.
And since we live in that generation where everything is publicized on social media and things like that, you don't know who just recorded you, who just took a selfie without you knowing.
Exactly.
It happens all the time, and you influence people without even knowing. So it's always important for, like you said, put your best foot forward and just be who you are.
Absolutely.
Because when you start to fake at something that you're not, that next person that you didn't think was watching seen it and thought that, hey, that's what real is. And that's where this generation gets confused, because they start seeing everything online like, hey, that's what real is, not realizing that was just a script somebody was playing.
Come on.
And now they just gonna do nothing but keep perpetuating the cycle over and over and over again. And then before you know it, the community's messed up because you're not being who you are and you're not putting your best foot forward. You're just
Exactly.
following line.
Can I just add something about community? When I was growing up, and this session is very well, it's timed, it's named greatly. Because when I was growing up, the definition of community is different than the definitions that I hear now. My community had physical buildings as well that were owned by African Americans. I saw the black person who owned the grocery store. My doctor and dentist lived in my neighborhood. They were black. The people who had the dry cleaners were black. The grocery store, the shoe shop, the drill team that I belonged to was in my neighborhood. I lived in a segregated neighborhood. And so community to me, for a person who grew up in the 60s, is a different definition of the community. I agree with the definitions, but you asked me my perspective of what community meant. And so for me, I could step outside of my door and see the person on the corner who owned the grocery store. See Dr. Goodyear, Dr. King, the dentist. I saw all of those people every day. And so for community for me is a physical place as well as a place that I live.
Right.
I
And
can't
can
wait
I
to
just
get back to that.
piggyback off of what you just said? When you say that you were able to walk outside and look to your left and your right, and you're seeing people who are business owners, who are skilled, guess what? That shows you, as that young person, I can do that. I can do
Exactly.
that. And now we have communities, and this was the population that I worked with. When you look to your left, you have your uncle who is living with you and your grandmother and your mom who is struggling with an addiction. And now you look to your right, and now you have your aunt who is on her 5th child, and she's also living in the house with you. And so it's like when you're looking for that role model, who do you see? Who do you have around you? And so that young person may want to do better. They may want to be better, but who is going to instill those tools in that person to kind of rise up? And so this also piggybacks off of what the young lady mentioned, is that sometimes community isn't necessarily those who were the family you were born into. It's the people you connect with and who have that same common interest. So that young person may be forced to kind of, I can't look to my uncle and I can't look to my aunt and my mom, but there's this amazing teacher at school who's always encouraging me to be better, or that advisor, that counselor, or someone else in the community. So it's just really important that we kind of instill in young people, you are not your environment. You're not, your environment doesn't define you. It's okay to go outside of your environment. And if you see someone who's a positive role model, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to let them know, hey, you know what, I've seen you're doing something right over there. Can you kind of walk me through how to do that? And we really need to empower our young people to speak up and learn how to ask for help and not see that as something that's embarrassing. And so I just wanted to throw that in there.
Can I talk about real quick as well?
Go ahead.
Yes, George. Go ahead, George.
Go ahead.
It'll be real quick. I like what you said, Charlie. We have to empower the next generation. If you have that role model, that's what you should be gravitating towards. Greatness should be able to study greatness, right? All these panelists on here, they're great for what they do. The next generation, they're going to be great for what they do as well. However, their perception of what they see as great is an athlete, is a rapper. It might be a drug dealer. whatever their perception is not that positive role model that they're accustomed to seeing. And so I think that was Dr. Burnett that just said about the common unity. I break down words like that as well. And so when you look at community, it says unity in the word. There is no unity within our community. It's just not. It's so broken and it's divided, but it's strategically divided. And our next generation, is so hard for them to see it because they say, oh, well, you are my competition and I have to compete against you. And so if you get in my way, then I have to take you out. As opposed to saying, oh, we're not competing against each other in a threatening way. I'm competing to make you better. Iron sharpens iron. However, we don't have people that are, or we don't have our generation that we can actually mold into thinking like, yes, look at what they've done. Look at how they built this business. You know, I don't know which one of the panelists said, but she talked about the community actually being a place, right? We don't have that to go out and see. Everything that goes when you live in a community, everything that you look around is not owned by anybody in that block. It's not.
It's not.
And that's what we don't have a way to take back what we have invested in, and then we wonder why we're still starving for our peace.
Right.
And so we have to be able to teach our young people that it is okay for somebody to look just like you, to be making his or her own money, however they're doing it. Hopefully it's in a positive way, but you shouldn't feel threatened by it. You have to be able to study what they're doing because there is something they're doing that is gravitating to you towards their success. Study it. Don't be afraid of it. Go after it and make it your own. Stop competing with everybody. Comparison is a thief of joy. We have to stop being so willing to compare ourselves and say, okay, well, how can I be a leader? But I think the only time that people want to be leaders is when they have somebody to follow that is on social media. And that's the thing. We have too many trends on social media as opposed to trends in communities that are stepping up and saying, this is what I want to do. Like our moderator, he's a great aspect of that leader, that young leader. And so we need more people to gravitate towards people like himself because he is standing out above the influences. So I want to commend him for that as well.
George, if I could,
my quick addition to the community piece, as we're talking across the decades, Sister Yvonne talked about the 60s. I was a transition between the 60s and the 70s. My formative years was mostly in the 70s, but I was also watching from Compton, California, during the Watts riots in the 60s as a child. Didn't understand a lot other than my mother saying, get your head down, they'll think you're white. When all the Molotov cocktails was flying in the streets and the fires were popping off. Later, that was like psychologically, wow, here I am, a very light-skinned brother who had to be hidden almost in my own family. All the rest of my family members being darker didn't have that issue. But anyway, the Black community unraveled. From that tight-knit community Yvonne was talking about in the neighborhood, Compton was a very tight-knit community for Black people. 70s, I moved more into the South Central LA area. And then, of course, the gang violence and the drugs started to infest the neighborhood and the unraveling of the community or family again. So decades we can't take lightly how they have affected. And when I say tradition, I really want to throw out one more term, tribes. Traditional, historically, tribal. We're all tribal. We come from tribal backgrounds. I talk to and work with a lot of Native Americans. They obviously believe in tribal connections. And today I hear the youth and the young adults speaking about that not being in their communities, and I get that. It doesn't mean take it away from the heart of who you are and who you're really connected to, and not to forget that all these other communities can be peripheral communities, but then for me, there's always home. There's always home, and that's my tribe. That's where my definition of identity comes from.
Absolutely. I love hearing the entire panel, and if I could summate what I heard when it comes to community, Tyrell, it would be this. Number one, your community starts within your home. I know it's been different and it changes as you go along, But when we think about the family unit, that's where everything is learned. Authority, responsibility, how you treat one another, so on and so forth. Now, I heard the words, and I love how George broke that out. Think about this. The first place that you're ever going to learn how to respect someone is in your home. Whether you're seeing what right looks like, whether you're seeing what not to do, whatever the case may be, it starts in your home. But there are two C's that I really want to make sure that we're paying attention to. And one of those C's is what I heard my brother George say. He said that people are competing. See, the problem is the lens is incorrect. The problem is our perception has been diluted.
Right.
We are not here to compete. We're here to complement.
Right.
Right? And if you get that, whether it be in the home, whether it be on social, whether it be anywhere, why can't we compete healthily by complementing one another? Why don't I compliment the good that you do? Why don't I learn? Let me take it as if we were in the kitchen and we were baking. What do? You sift the flour before you bake the cake, right?
Right.
Because you only want the good stuff
That's right.
to come into the cake,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Well,
Yes,
it's the
sir.
same thing with our community. Help me by complimenting me on the good that I do, and then encourage me how to strengthen my weakness or delegate my weakness. Let's start in the home by learning how to complement instead of competing. And when we go out into the community, it will then be the exact same.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I meant when I said that communities have rules.
Exactly.
And they have do's and don'ts. And in the community, you knew when you were outside of those boundaries, exactly is what he's saying. Because the community would bring you back. And it didn't have to be your parents. It could be anybody. And
Right.
you knew that you had to respect those people because those people were your elders and they were in your community. And so family, I believe, is the missing piece in all of this, is that because our families are weak, the structure, the foundation is weak, and we are the only group of people that do not practice group thinking. We practice individual thinking. Every other group of people who come in how to stay inside those boundaries. So until we decide that we're going to do group thinking instead of individual thinking, we're going to continue to face these problems that we have because no one can solve a problem by themselves. We have to work as a group. And I'm just going to throw this in. I believe that all the things that we talked about, especially the destruction of the Black family, has been done intentionally because no group of people can survive without a foundation. It's not possible.
And I just want to say, for the people that are listening online and that are tuning in, even though we're talking about it, just remember that we are still making those strides. Where you haven't gotten to a place where the division is not there, because we saw it happen I'm born in 93. So we seen the destruction of the family. We see the mistrust between siblings and stuff like that, and the collaborations not be there. But we're getting to a point now as adults where we do things called collab over competition, which is exactly what you just said. We complement, and we're able to sit each other down and say, hey, let me give you some constructive criticism. I love what you did. I have fun. But these are little areas I think you can do better. And this is how we're going to help each other. So we continue to do that even as a family standpoint. We just say, hey, sis, I see that you're doing this. Let me help you with X, Y, and Z. Let me help you with my niece, with my nephew, and things like that. So we are making those efforts. And we are, as far as leasing looks like, that process of getting the tax revenue and things like that taken care of. We're slowly learning. Unfortunately, we do have to learn in individual groups, and they're small groups, but the progress is being made. We're getting back, because every time I meet someone new that's from a different state, we're always talking about the same thing, which is building Black Wall Street, which is having our own community, our own neighborhood where there's nothing but Black families who has ownership of the entire plaza. And our generational leader at that time was Nipsey Hussle, because he started that whole plaza in LA, and that just strike the match for everybody else. And before now, everybody was like, we got to get a plaza. We got to get that clearance. We got to get that barbecue spot. We got to get this. We got to get that. We got to take back of all the things that we created that they monetize on. So those strides are being made. And I just want to make sure that everybody knows who's tuning in that even though we're talking about it, we still are taking those steps to make sure that it actually happens and it actually, comes out forthright for the next generation.
Well, speaking about the Black Wall Street, Black folks, we spent money within the community to build up our community. Why do you feel like we're slow in that area? Why do you feel like we don't spend our money first within our community? We always go outside of the community to spend our money. Because if you keep the money circulating within the community, we grow. And just like how Black Wall Street is. So my question is, what happened to that aspect?
Consumer mentality.
Resources.
I could just leave it right there. Consumer mentality over legacy mindset. See, back in the day, during that time, people who study that and understand that, there was a purpose, there was a legacy that you were building, right? My question to the entire community is, why is it taking us so long to get back to that mindset? Because it is a mindset. But we've come to the consumer side, and we just want what we want. Now, I'll be honest with you, there also has to be excellence in service, there has to be product, and there has to be an experience that goes along with that. Just because of the color of your skin, that doesn't make your product excellent. And if you don't have great customer service, no one wants to come and actually give you their money, right? So we can't just look at it from that perspective. But to answer your question, Tyrell, it would be, we are dealing with a consumer mentality.
Right.
We are literally consumers. We're not producing anything anymore, and we're not utilizing what we would call a legacy mindset.
Right, yeah, I agree
I would
totally.
like to add to what the doctor said, just quickly, just to be a little more aggressive and disciplined, because back to the community being and the Black, let's say, business owners being farther out. We're not in a small community, as Yvonne and I talked about growing up, where the Black businesses were right there. They are out there, so we have to be a little more aggressive and assertive and discipline, as it was also said, to go out and find the Black business and search. I've done some Google searches. I need a Black business to help me with this or that. That takes a little bit extra than knowing it's right down the street. And so we can't be lazy about the return back to what we should have been doing. Go ahead.
And Tyrell, what I was going to add, a word that is so important, is called desegregation. So desegregation played a huge part. I just completed a short documentary in regards to a predominantly, actually the Frenchtown community in Tallahassee, Florida was one of the first all-Black communities in the United States of America. And it was nothing but Black businesses, from the grocery store to the pharmacy to the gas station. And that was due to segregation. It was an all-Black high school. So guess what? All the professors, all the administrative staff, African Americans. We had our own dentist, just like she mentioned previously. That's what her community looked like. So when you're segregated and you're forced to only spend your money in your community because it's not welcomed outside of your community, guess what? You're building that wealth. You're building that wealth and you're seeing your community thrive. And then here comes desegregation, which in the city of Tallahassee, they forced the school to shut down. So guess what? So now these teachers are having to try to find employment in other schools or having to leave the area altogether. And so now you're forced to leave your community. And guess what? When you leave your community, your money goes with you. And it's so. The irony is amazing that, desegregation was supposed to, help us move on up. And it was such a, anyway, I'm not going to put on myself much about it. But, we had in Gadsden County, Florida, there were millions because Coca-Cola was here. And so it's like when you learn about the history of desegregation and how well off African Americans were during that time in the 50s and the 60s, and then you see this what's happening to our communities in the late 70s and 80s. Now we're dealing with extreme poverty in areas where the average income was, middle class income. And now there's no income. So I just wanted to just add that segregation and desegregation played a huge role in the removal of Black dollars from Black communities.
Well, I'm glad you
Can
brought that up.
I jump in real quick?
Yeah.
Really quick? Yeah, I agree. we wanted to sit at the table until we realized that we didn't deserve it. We didn't deserve that seat at the table. We wanted to be treated equally until we realized that nobody is willing to put their foot in our shoes, right?
Exactly.
If you ask somebody, would you trade places with a black person, they're so quick to either ignore the question or not respond to the question. And so when she's talking about desegregation, it's absolutely true. There's no reason for us to be putting our money into other people's pockets as opposed to ours. Dr. Burnett said something about, that consumer mentality. We have to provide the experience, which some people don't know how to provide the experience because they haven't been properly afforded the opportunity to showcase that experience, and as well as people are so judgmental about how us as Black people, how we value ourselves. Right? We might say that, we think our clothing line should be worth $25, $30, but somebody in our community would say, that's too high. But you would go out and pay the same thing for a polo shirt or whatever the case may be because it's name brand.
Oh my
so
God.
it's frustrating. It's so frustrating, and so we don't see, people don't see the value in what we see ourselves as a value, but they see values in everything else but Black. And that's what I don't understand as well. And so we're so desperate to fit into a table that there are no chairs for.
Right.
That's kind of where I wanted to go with that.
Yeah, well, we're dealing with postpartum slave mentality.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's what we're dealing with. And it goes back to what I said initially about the group thinking. We do not think as a group. We think as individuals, and that is by design. And so I have a word that I use all the time. I say I am not in the position in this country not to be intentional with everything that I do and say. I have to be very careful about what I do, how I say it, because every action, every choice that I make will affect the generations ahead of me. We have generational curses in our family that we have to honestly accept and admit that we need to change.
Right.
And this wealth gap in this country, I hate to tell you, it's wider than it's ever been.
Yes.
We as a group of people are in bad shape because we do not practice group economics. You have to consciously decide that you're going to go to an African American store. Yeah. That should be your first priority when you get paid. Everyone in this country knows that, and I'll just use the Jewish community as an example. Everything in their home, everything they purchase comes from a Jewish person. They will not go outside of their neighborhood and buy anything. And so the mind rules the body. It's what Sojourner Truth says. We have to get our minds right to understand that we have an obligation to do this, because this is how we're going to save future generations, and this is how we're going to raise our people out of poverty. It's about the dollars, folks. It's about the money. That's all what it's about. Until you get you some money and you're sitting at the table and you can go out there and put up a billboard to put Breonna Taylor's picture on it, that's where we need to be, because that is power and that's what we need. This is how we change our communities. Economics. This is how we change.
I have a question, because what is the next step after that? Because once we start getting that mentality of, I'm going to support my people, I'm going to shop with our people, I'm going to get that billboard, I'm going to get that magazine, I'm going to get that social media presence, and I'm going to invest in boosting it so everybody knows that this service and this product is available, and these are the people who own it, this is why they do what they do, this is the ingredients, everything that you need to have the service, the experience, everything wrapped up in a bow. What is the next step after that? Because right now in our generation, that's actually what we practice. Everything I have on came from a Black vendor. And all of my friends, we all do the same thing as well. And not only that, but we make sure that we go and find the Black restaurants. We make sure that we go and find the Black beauticians. We make sure that we go and find the Black doctors. Like, we found people who do teeth whitening, people who custom make sunglasses or regular glasses and things like that. We've even, I'm not sure if you've heard of the Archwood Exchange, which is basically a Black marketplace, where they have their own brick and mortar. You can come and purchase everyone's product directly there. And then every first Saturday, they have a vendor set up where all vendors are welcome to bring their own products into their parking lots, and we all just get together every first Saturday and do that. So once we have that money, we have that mindset, we have that community. What is the next step to maintaining that? Because that's what my generation is facing. We're all together like, we're tired of being oppressed. We're tired of making excuses. We're tired of people telling us that we can't do it. Now that we're doing it on our own, how do we take ownership over this? Like, how do we take this to the next level to where this is not just only what's happening in my neighborhood? This is not only just happening on the South Side. This is not only just happening in Arizona. How do we take that to the next level to where everybody else can see that? Because I think that's what we're falling behind on, is that we have it. We have our central hub, and then we grow it to other people. But if you leave outside of this 4-block corner, it's done. It's unheard of. So how do we get everybody else on board to keep that momentum going? Because we have it, it can be accomplished, but how do we get to the next level?
Well, the goal obviously is in any business is to have income coming in. My point that I'm making here is that we have to consciously think about these things. That I'm not saying that I have never bought something from someone who didn't look like me, but my first thought has always been, I'm going to go to them first, because I realize the dollars in our community don't stay there that long. But you want customers from everywhere.
Right.
But it's the consciousness that I'm talking about. And that comes from knowing who you are. That strength comes from the past. And we have to start and continue to, because there are people out there already, we have to teach our children who they are. Because when you know who you are, you know where you're going.
Exactly.
And so that's how this spreads, is that you have the confidence, you've gone out there and you've done something that someone else has never done. But what I'm saying to you is that as an African American, I always have to think consciously about what I'm doing.
So think
Tyrell,
about, okay.
Can I say something?
Just
to that?
yeah.
Okay, so here's the real issue at hand. Listen to what you just asked. We went out and we did this. But now what is the next step? Number one, own your platform, which is what you're creating, right?
Right.
Invite others to the platform. But with that said, I have to piggyback off of what Ms. Yvonne said. Money is green. Money doesn't have a color.
That's right.
And in order for me to be able to come back and help my community, I have to be able to provide a product, service, whatever the case may be, that the masses want and need, that provides value, right? And then I can come back and say, hey, I want to build this for this community, and I want to do X, Y, and Z. I'm of a different mindset. I say provide what is excellent and allow, listen, let me put it this way, very plain and simple. Let me move on, Tyrell. Here's the deal. When you produce and serve, it will bring in the dynamic that you're talking about.
That's right.
And that's the revenue that everyone is seeking. But you have to have a plan to walk that out. I've got 4 blocks that are doing this. How can I duplicate that somewhere else?
Right.
Can we own a bank? Can we do something that is going to outlast our here and our right now? That's the next step. That's the next step. But we don't have enough time to continue, because I know you're trying to, but that's the next step.
I want to make sure we bring that in, because it's like we always get the customers from everywhere else, and then gladly we're starting to tap into our own people, and they're starting to jump on board. But I just want to make sure that we just don't lose the momentum.
Gotta have a
We're
plan.
starting to educate, we're starting to feel inspired, and we're starting to get that, I can do this, you know, and it's being done. So it's like, I want to make sure that as we're encouraging, as we're moving forward, that we know this is the next step, because we're just capitalizing on the momentum right now and we're bringing it out. But I want to make sure that we have this is what we're going to do next.
Right.
This is what we're going to do next.
Exactly. What we also need to do is
Can I-
back then we had
Can I-
the power to stop the economy. Think about the day Martin Luther King, how the bus boycott. They stopped spending the money on the buses until they got money first outside of their community and started spending the money within the community. So just to switch the topics a little bit, racial discrimination and police brutality is nothing new. We all been through it. But what are some of your experiences, or somebody that you know has experienced with police brutality? We'll start with
Can I jump-
people on virtual.
Go Oh, can I start? You
Oh,
said
we can hear
racial
you.
and discrimination. You said, can you hear me? Oh, you
I
said
can
racial
hear you.
discrimination and social injustice?
Yes.
Okay. You guys can't, they can't hear me?
I can hear you, George.
I can't.
Okay.
Just a second. They're trying to fix the sound.
Okay.
There you go. You good. You good.
You good? You hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You said racial discrimination and social injustice?
Racial discrimination and police brutality.
Police brutality. I'll say it started for me at a young age. I'm from North Carolina, and one of the first things that I got exposed to was being called the N-word, right? You know, and just being told that, oh, you'll never amount to anything. You're going to end up dead before 21. You know, you're going to be locked up. You're going to be a father, you know, before you're not even going to graduate high school. I was told all these things, you know. I'm coming up in North Carolina. I've been racially profiled, being chased around stores and stuff like this, especially when I had dreadlocks. I've been pulled over by police officers because you guys can't see, but I stand 6'2", I'm dark skinned, and I fit the mold, quote unquote, but what a drug looks like. At that time, went to HBCU, driving a 1985 Camaro. I fit the mold of a drug dealer. And I got frustrated because I was like, I'm constantly being pulled over, I'm constantly being ridiculed by how I look. And I remember telling the police officer on the AT's campus, I said, you know, I thought because I have jealousy pulled over. He said, yes, I do. He said, okay, I cut my dress and I hadn't been pulled over. But I have had an encounter as an adult as well when I was in the middle of Walmart and I think this had to be after not too long after I can't go back to the 2016, there's so many. But I'm walking in Walmart just leaving church and my godfather, who is Caucasian, his 2 young boys are with them, and they look like him, but his wife is black. And this guy, he's walking towards me, I'm looking at him on my phone, and like I said, I stand 6'2", so I feel like I can walk the same way you can walk. I don't want to get out of your way. This white guy, he's walking right in front of me, and he sees me and expects me to move, and I didn't move, and he reaches for his gun in the middle of Walmart. It's frustrating because at the end of the day, my fight is for generation. I hate that I can't go places because I feel like if I go somewhere at the end of the night, I might get pulled over and I don't know if I'm going to make it home. I have a fight to make sure people like yourself are real, have that future, they know that they can be that way, they know that they can stand above the influence and do things that can change the world and not be the person that's constantly begging for change. So I have to be very mindful that I'm a target just because I'm black, I'm educated, I know how to articulate myself, and at the end of the day, I just walk in black excellence every single step that I take. But the world doesn't see that. So it's frustrating, it's constantly frustrating. When you're constantly being looked at for just being who God created you to be.
Exactly.
And I'll leave it at that.
You know, I'll quickly go from what George was saying, and obviously, again, told me to life, workers, manufacturer. I didn't go work. I mean, people just probably didn't know. I was mostly growing up even as a Latino. And they got that I could speak Spanish. So you know, it was an interesting dynamic being light skinned. What I did was go to college in a white college in the areas. And that was a just scenario. And I was supposed to go back country and basketball. Physical activity with the white guy. We got married and go back to you. Where you want to go back to where you come from. Okay. Where? Compton. Because we talk about from a Mideast country where so we're still, you know, discrimination and all for basketball. I will just begin with a situation a few we're applying home loan. So here we go. Systemic racism found out is a lot of they do we were as a culture and as a people, ethnicity. And the law should have been approved, everything was set to go with home purchase, and the plug was pulled. Both of us left that situation that we fight because we do believe redlining, and they found out they were trying to up into this community that we would have fit more for. And that hurt. Because you get a lot of overwork rate for them. Man, to be on that in a systemic rate, it doesn't go good at all.
I would add that, fortunately, I can say that I have not experienced any police brutality directly, but I also come from a family that is a big law enforcement family.
Okay.
So that includes my mother, that includes two of her sisters, and two uncles that married into the family. And I think that was definitely a benefit for me and my cousins, and that's because they really had good heart-to-hearts with us about coming into contact with law enforcement. And they prepared us for that because they knew it was inevitable. And a story that sticks out to me is I was visiting one of my aunts who works at the jail in South Florida. And I was bringing her some lunch. And there was a young lady sitting there handcuffed next to a bunch of people that, I mean, one person looked like he had just been brutally beaten. I mean, the gas was still open. The next person was drunk out of her mind. And she's sitting there next to me, and she looked just like me. She was dressed very nice. She looked like she had just got off work. And my aunt looked at me and she said, "You see her?" And she said, "You know why she's here?" And I said, "Yeah, she goes because she did absolutely nothing." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Her crime was when she was pulled over for a traffic violation. She got too sassy." That was the comment that the deputy shared with my aunt when he brought her in. So he needed to teach her a lesson. Because she argued with him about not running a red light. And my aunt said to me, she said, "If you ever, when you come into contact with law enforcement, I don't care if you're right." She said, "You need to fight
In a different way.
You
Exactly.
need to fight in a position where you can fight." And so she said, "You stay humble, you say yes ma'am and yes sir, and you walk away." She said, "But the most important thing is that you get to walk away.
Exactly.
You get to come home to your family." And she said, "You remember badge numbers, you remember names, you have to recognize that the person that you see as a person doesn't see you as you're not going to see as someone's daughter. You're always going to be seen as someone's wife, someone's loved one. You are seen based on this." And said, "Oh, person needs to know." And so it was those conversations with family members who work in law enforcement, who saw it directly, that I feel was very beneficial for myself. So that when I did come into contact with law enforcement, I was very, "Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am." If I didn't agree with them, I dealt with it after. But I think that we don't have enough people, or we don't have enough young people who are being taught that you can fight this.
Right.
You have the right to stand up for yourself. You have a voice. But there's a time and place to use that voice so that you can make it home to your family. And so that's all I have to say about that.
It's just,
Charlie,
it's just crazy how we have to live in that time where we have to say yes sir, no sir, even when they're calling you out of your name, calling you different racial slurs to your face, or just being disrespectful. Like,
but they're the ones with the badge.
it's just, it's just hard. Like,
They're the
it's hard
one with
to
the gun.
contain. Exactly,
Gun.
they're the ones with the gun.
It's not just that it's done.
Right, exactly. They're the one with the
Right.
gun provoking the situation.
Get away with it.
Exactly.
So let me-
Get away with it. The gun is what takes your life. So that's something that I'm always mindful. But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
But I was gonna ask, like, how do you guys feel that this is still an issue that we have to deal with? Because I know it happened in your generation and your generation. Like, how do you feel like this is still a problem that's still going on? I'll let you go, Mr. Burnett, first.
well, a couple things that I'd like to say. Being respectful should not be something that, is out of the ordinary, is out of your norm, right? And I get it, and I appreciate that, Charlie. I'm a military man. We've got over 100 100 some odd years of military service in our family, right? But when we begin to look at this thing of discrimination and police brutality and so on and so forth, there's a few things that we need to look at. You should be respectful to your elders or anyone who's in authority to begin with. I don't care what the color of their skin is.
Exactly.
And yes, do you have to learn how to actually communicate to the unloving person, the person who calls you out your name? Does it take discipline, order, and structure for you to do that? Yes, but you live to see another day. So when we think about these things, yes, what are we dealing with? Racism, ignorance, stereotyping, profiling. We're dealing with mistreatment. We're dealing with tags and titles that have been placed upon us.
Right.
But you also have to have what we would call the intestinal fortitude to know who you are. Above everything else, whatever they call you. If you sit and look at me today, I am not what they called me. I am not what they called me. This panel is not what everybody else said. But it starts within you. It starts with the right mindset. It starts with the right mentality. But more importantly, it starts with action. Action is what we need to take.
Exactly.
Action in teaching our young children and helping them to see and understand. Listen, I have been on the battlefields of war many times, but I get to sit here with you today. You want to know why? Because I took action, I listened, and I applied what I needed to get back home. So,
Exactly.
yes,
I have a quick
why are
question.
we still dealing with that today? That was the question, the last question that you asked. Injustice or inequality of any sort will have to be fought until it is no longer.
That's right.
So until the world actually gets in their head that we are human beings, that it's civility and humanity over everything, we're going to continue to have this fight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So-
And can I add, we have to understand that racism is a team sport.
Right.
See, and you, just like any game, if you're playing chess, Monopoly, checkers, you got to know the rules, right? We got to know the rules. And that, I coincide with everything that he said. You know, we got to understand the game that you're playing. Now, game may not be the correct word, but that's the good word that I'm using.
Right.
You got to understand who you are and who you're with and what you need to do. And so you can't ever forget that racism is a team sport. And so when I was a kid, it was so up in my face, but I didn't even realize it. I didn't realize that I was only allowed to go to the skating rink on Thursdays. That was Black Night.
Right.
I didn't realize when I went to the State Theater that all the black people sat upstairs. I didn't realize that the elementary school that I walked to, my music teacher, Mr. Anderson, for the spring concert, had us singing Old Black Joe. And our parents are sitting out there in the audience just clapping, our performance, So these are the kinds of things that I experienced as a child. But it'll go back to what I said to you, because I had that intestinal fortitude that was just spoken of. That stuff just rolled right off of my back. I didn't care what those people said about me. I didn't care what they said. I only cared what my parents told me who I was. My parents told me I was good. My parents told me I was smart. My parents told me I could do anything I wanted to do. And I believed them. Now, I know that it's different now. That's not the
Right, we don't have
situation
that.
with parents.
Exactly.
Their friends mean more to them. But that, for me, as a parent, is a calling card to make me know that I need to do better.
So do you think that's why so many of our teens are having trouble, because we don't have those parents
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, don't worry about what the people are talking"? Because
the talk that her parents had with her, the police officer.
Exactly.
We cannot allow our children to live in this society and not know what the rules are. We have to tell our children, as painful as it is, we have to explain to them so that they don't become bitter, but better.
I like the
This
rules
is
of
what
the
you
game.
do in this situation.
If I could chime in on that real quick, the
Go
rules of
ahead,
the
yeah.
game, I love that, because racism is a social construct. It's changing. It changed from Sister Yvonne's time. It's going to keep changing. It's not going to be the same in 5 years, but racism, the social construct, the racist The racist institutions are looking to see how they can move the game, shell game. I don't know if everybody's familiar with that term or what that means, but the shell game means you move it as people figure it out. So the parents, the teachers of the next generation really need to be teaching where it's being moved to, ideally, because it's not what it used to be. The overt stuff had to go covert. It's constantly having to be changed. The language they're using now in the political, I forget the term, but it's the gaslighting or something else, that there's terms, there's some things that are being said that are racist at the core, but they are politically correct, so they can say it to the public. You have to be educated to the social constructs as it keeps changing the game.
I have a question because I'm on the fence with this because I understand exactly everything what everyone is saying as far as having that discipline, as far as having that respect for your elders, respect for people with authority, and knowing yourself, knowing where that come from, having those conversations about what to do when you're in those situations. I'm in the middle because I have grandparents that I've lived through that actually walked through the Civil War, walked through the protests, and then I've actually had, run-ins with the law, not saying that we did anything because we were completely innocent in the situation. We were just black. But my thing is, when you know yourself, you know your history, and you see it forthright, and you've actually been in the situation where someone you love deeply was murdered for no reason at all,
Right.
and you still have to say, yes, sir, no, sir. That's still equivalent to saying, yes, boss, yes, master.
Yep.
And I'm in that generation to where we're like, I no longer want to bow down to this construct. Because like you said, it is something that continues to evolve generation after generation after generation, and it changes its form, it changes its shell. When as Black people or African American people do we say we're no longer a part of this game and we're not even going to participate in it? Not saying that we have to take it back to the Wild West where it's like you defend your own territory by any means, but why is it we are always the one who have to humble ourselves when we had the most taken away from us? Just recently, we were part of a protest for Dion, who was shot and killed by a sheriff's office, and he still got away with it, but yet he didn't do anything. There was an ambulance literally 5 feet from him, and they didn't let him come and check on him and heal his wounds or anything like that while he was already handcuffed. They said, no, we can't bring the ambulance over because this is still not necessarily, the
Still an
situation
active crime
hasn't
scene.
been taken care of for the ambulance to come, and he died on site. And they were 5 feet from him. So we go through these things where it's blasted all over social media where people that we love and we care for and we look up to are being murdered and nothing's happening, but you still want us to be respectful and be humble. When do we say enough is enough? I'm not going to do that because these laws are not meant to be for us.
Right.
We, as Black people, they're pent against us. Everything that we do is for us to fail, from education, from economics, from health. So why is it that we continuously tell the next generation, in order for you to make it home, you have to do X, Y, and Z? When do we empower our own people? Or when do we separate and say, hey, you know what? Desegregation is not good for us. Let's go ahead and do our own thing over here. Why do we continuously have to buy in to something like that? Because even when you break it down to politics, to laws, to paying taxes, we're paying them to get what we want, but yet it was a sweat off our own backs. It was my idea. It was something that I did, but I have to pay somebody else in order to own it. But you had no idea about it until I did it. But then comes around, because I'm just going to give you an example. When it comes to hairstyles, just an example, we're going to go take it all the way back to Madam C.J. Walker. If she created this, and then all of a sudden, our Kim Kardashian comes out of nowhere, causes something else, but it's the exact same thing. It's the exact same process. It's the exact same weed. But because she did it, it's something else, and they take over what we did, and we can no longer have ownership over because somebody else in that lane, with that skin tone, with that publicity, said it. Now it's what she said, regardless that I had it. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, how do I continue to bring that pride into what I'm doing, where I'm from, and continuously, whenever someone outside comes in with authority and says, no, it's no longer that. Like, I get you have to wait till you get to the courtroom, but it's like, you're telling us once again to back down.
That's what I was about to say, is that when you, and I guess you and I have different definitions of bow down. And what I mean by that is that those millions down, They knew that that was the way to fight for him. They knew that they weren't able to be there at that moment when his life was taken away from
Exactly.
him. But that was how they could fight for him. None of those people were bowing down. They may have taken a knee to symbolize something, but none of them were bowing down. My mom, I've shared this with my cousin Tara and many of my close friends. My mother used to say something to me. She used to always say, know your audience. Know who you're speaking to. And what I mean by that is, I may have a second language. I may know how to speak French, but I'm not going to walk up to a group of kindergartners and speak French to them because I know they wouldn't understand me. That law enforcement officer who has his hand on his gun, who you may choose to become argumentative with, who you may choose to become aggressive with, who you may choose to use your assertiveness with, he may not see you as someone who has the right to be assertive with him. And so if he chooses to take his life, or take your life, and then uses the excuse to hide behind that badge, how do you continue that fight?
But see, that's
How do you continue standing with that? And the thing is, you're not, and that's what I'm saying, you're not bowing down to that person. You're still there to fight that fight. You're still there.
No,
to
that's
fight
what I'm
that fight.
saying.
No one is saying to go home and curl up in a ball. I'm saying fight it. Continue to fight it. But you have to be able
We've been
to fight.
fighting
You have to
something
be
like
here
this
to
for
fight.
years, is what I'm saying. Because I agree with what you're saying. If you live to fight another day, learn your audience, learn to make that this doesn't ever happen again. But this has been happening for over 400 years, is what I'm saying. The fact that they still have the ability to say, I can hide behind a badge, or I can hide behind, I felt threatened, is what I'm saying. Like, how many more generations do we have to go by where that is an excuse? Is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Because I
and
understand
that's why
100%
forums like
what
this
you
are so
all are
important.
saying, but
That's
I'm
why
saying we know our laws, we know our rights, it's as simple
need
as
more
I'm
of it.
black at the wrong time. Because that literally is
Can
what
I- can I
happened to me
just-
and my
can I
friends
just
coming
jump
from
in?
a movie theater.
You see, besides all the things that we talked about, the one thing that we have not talked about is political power. You have the right to
so
vote. You have the power of the ballot, young lady. And you
So
need
many
to
of
know.
us do not use
Listen,
it.
we are so disengaged with this. We make so many excuses as to why we don't vote. You and I, you may not know, but I'm just going to throw this out here. Whenever the presidential election is not the most important election in this
It
country.
is not.
The
It's
most
your
important
local
election in this country is the DA that you elect. The judge who over how many, 300 have been appointed by this administration.
Right.
This is how you fight.
Right.
You go to school and you get a law degree and you become a Supreme Court justice. You become a judge. You become a local judge. You become a DA. You become a bail bondsman, an area that black people aren't even in. We don't even know how it works, but those are the people that are prosecuting us. You stand up, you become informed in your community, you know what things are on the ballot, you know what to vote for, who to vote for. This is the power of the ballot, folks. And until we decide that we're going to use this to change this systems, we are fighting systems. We are fighting caste. We are fighting people who have privilege, and they are not about to give it up freely.
Exactly.
so is that the
And they know that they don't have
It
to.
is the power
That is
of the
Exactly.
ballot. The power of the ballot. If you're not registered to vote, you better get out there and vote.
Right.
Is what
Complete
you
the
better do.
census.
Vote them out of office. This
I
is how we
am
beat
I'm
them.
doing the census.
Yeah, the
Complete that.
census.
We
This
need
is how
that.
we
I'm
beat them
working-
at their game. This is how
I'm
we
working
beat
as
them.
a census worker right now, and you guys, you have no idea how many of us refuse to complete the census.
right. That's
And when
right.
I give them all of the logic and I tell them every person who is unaccounted for, that is federal dollars that don't come into your community. Now, I don't want to have nothing to do with that. That's what you say. And so I tell people it's taking those small steps to help bring about change, but then you're disengaged, but then you'll be the first one complaining, well, we don't have this in our community and we don't have representation in our community, but you're not registered to vote. You're not encouraging people to vote. You won't do something as simple as take a minute to complete a census with me. And you just hit the nail right on the head. But I love that you pointed that out, because there's so many ways to fight. It doesn't have to be that direct argument with that racist person. It doesn't have to be right then. There are so many areas, and I guess that's what I'm trying to stress, is be here so that you can be that lawyer. Stick around so you can be that bondsman. Stick around so that you can be the next DA of your community. That's what's important. It's not just having that one-on-one argument with a racist. You're not changing a bigot's mind, and he's not changing your mind. Like, let's just call it for what it is. So you need to get yourself in a place of authority or power or influence where you can be an advocate for us.
So besides Dejanay, because I know you protested, anybody else here after the George Floyd death, did you guys protest, or how did you guys handle that situation?
I'd love to answer that and kind of bring all of this together and answer your question at the same time. So let's make this clear. Everyone has a piece of the puzzle that they're supposed to play. Our issue right now is the head wants to be the foot wants to be the finger wants to be the knee, and that's a problem. Now, I understand why you asked that question.
Right.
Physically, no, I didn't go out to a protest.
Right.
Internationally, I sat from my home and I was in circles that had talks that would change what was happening.
Right.
So what I want to share with this generation is, yes, you have the zeal, the energy, the power to go out and do that.
Right.
But just because you don't see a me or an Yvonne or in there with you doesn't mean the fight is not continuing.
But see, here's the thing. It's not the fact that you're not there with us. We have never protested before.
I understand
This is the
that.
first time we ever went out and protested and
Yes.
went to create change. So we don't know what we're doing.
I understand
And
that.
so if we see those who have done that before with us, it would be like a guidance.
It's all about
And that's what we
education.
lack.
Even add us to the conversation, because even though you weren't there, you were having a conversation on how to move forward.
Absolutely.
So my generation is, I'm not even gonna lie. I went to the protest. I went 3 different times, and I said I'm never doing this again because this does not make
unorganized,
sense.
right.
Like, we are over here. 1 minute we're chatting, we're getting things done, we're requesting stuff from when they brought the soldiers and stuff down. We're
Right.
saying we're gonna do this. We're saying we're gonna do that, and then out of nowhere, somebody started playing music, and they just started dancing. I was 100% confused. I was like, what is going on?
Which is
Right.
exactly
So I
what
was
we're
like,
talking about.
okay, forget it. So me and my friends, we decided, you know what, we're gonna start to organize. We're starting to do things, and we actually started talking to the local politicians. We started calling with the churches and asking if they can set up so we can come vote, or they can at least tell us how we can get our rights and stuff right. So I appreciate that part too. And then they started telling us like, hey, you need to elect the DA. You need to pay attention to the judges. This is where you find the information at. But it's that lack of communication telling us that, you know, you can elect a judge, right?
Right.
A lot of us don't know that. When you see it on the ballot, I don't never know this name. I've never heard of this person. I'm just gonna skip it, you know. So that's where it goes into. So it's like, even though you're having these conversations, bring that generation into it so they can tell our friends like, hey, after we get out of school, we're gonna go over here and we're gonna talk to them, and they're gonna tell us about this, and this. Because for the longest, I thought the census were against our community, and then it wasn't until I
I've
started
had so
hanging out
many
with our
people say that to me.
Right.
yeah, it wasn't until I started hanging out with actual politics in our community who came out to our community centers where they told us, like, actually, this is where your funding come from. This is why that scholarship isn't available. And I'm like, dang, why come nobody ever told us? So
Education.
it goes
That's how
back to
that
communication.
community center is even there. That's the funding for the community center.
Absolutely.
It comes from
Right,
the
but what
census.
we see is our local bakers and our local hairstylists donating to it, because every time something goes wrong or we need t-shirts to do something like that, it's our local businesses that go into it. I never knew it had anything to do with the census or anything like that, because I only see the community people doing the work. So
Education
the
is the
breakdown,
key.
the behind the scenes of it is what's
Terrell,
not
can I
being shared
jump
with our
in?
generation, and we're just
Terrell, I
like,
wanna go back to the question, Terrell, about what you're
Yeah.
seeing, the young people seeing as they're protesting, the OGs, where are they? How can we bridge the two together?
So we're gonna answer that question, and then we're gonna go to our closing questions after you're done.
So one thing I just want to make as an observation is, our reality is that in the 60s, in Watts, in the 90s, I'm speaking of personal experiences in LA, the big Rodney King After Effects riots. It was young people it was still, so every generation is seeing
It
the same
always
kind of
is.
protest. It's the young people on the street, and as the doctor said, that does not mean the OGs or the older generations aren't behind the scenes protesting and advocating and trying to beat down legislation and push legislation. It does not mean they're not protesting. I do understand your ask about the advice you need. Are you out there just running the streets? Well, that's what protest is often. That's what an upheaval is. That's what that protest or revolt is. Now I want to just go back, and then I'll let you take it back over. What I'm hearing as a common thread again is, I'll pull from a scripture really, is that we don't run aimlessly, and we don't be a fighter that's just beating at the air. Okay, strategic fighting wins. A strategic fighter wins. One who's beating at the air does not end. A strategic runner wins the race. So that's all I can say for the young people. Just continue to be strategic. This is strategic. This urban experience is strategic, part of the strategic plan. The racism will continue, but the fight has to be smart and for the time at hand, not 400 years ago time, because the fight was there 400 years ago. The slaves lost their lives. The 60s, people lost their lives. The 90s, people lost their lives. And so we don't have to lose lives, though, to be strategic.
Right.
Such a good point. That is
Exactly.
an excellent point.
So we're going to move forward to our closing questions because we're coming short on time. But if you think about life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, those are supposed to be the rights for all of our people. And do you think this is achievable for the Black community? Why or not?
Well, let me say this. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were voted in,
Yeah.
and they can be voted out. So the whole thing about keeping your eye on the prize and making sure that you know what's really happening is really important. Any of those rights can be taken away from us because they were
Yes.
legislated.
And they were.
And so it's very important that young people understand the whole history of these things, and that, knowledge, this is what I'll say about knowledge. You have to seek knowledge, but yes, there has to be someone there to direct you. How do you find these things out? My dad told me everything I needed to know was in a book. There are still libraries around. Be curious enough to find out about who you are and what happened. And to be honest with you, I'm hopeful, but I don't really know. I don't think any of us know where we're headed. But I know that I would love to live in a country that really saw me. But I have to be realistic. We're talking about a group of people who built this country, who have been shut out, left out from the very beginning because that was the intent. And white privilege is not something that people are going to give up on. I'm telling you, they're not going to give it up easily. And so we have to build coalitions with other people, to work with us in order to reach our goals. So I'm hopeful in one way, but also I understand what I'm dealing with. And I know that it's going to be and will continue to be a hard fight. And Dr. Martin Luther King knew that. And let me just say one thing and add to that. At the end of Dr. King's life, he realized that the major concern that he had missed was economic power. And that's why he was murdered. He was murdered because he was fighting against the Vietnam War. And it wasn't his March on Washington speech that, it was his greatest speech. And if those of you who are interested, you need to go through some of his speeches and read the one he talks about the Other America speech. Read that speech. And that will give you some insight on what it is that you need to do. Because even at the end of his life, the people that were close to him turned against him. The community was not with Dr. King when he was murdered by this country.
There was a black lady that actually stabbed him in one of his speeches, like in the crowd. So it's even your own people that will turn against you.
That's true.
Right.
Another question. What advice would you give the Black community to keep hope alive?
To keep hope alive, number one, you have to know your identity, not what someone else puts upon you, not what someone else tells you you are. To keep hope alive, you have to dream. And to keep hope alive, not only do you have to dream, you have to take that dream and cause it to become a reality.
Exactly.
Everything that you are experiencing today, it's because you're standing on the shoulders of those who came before you. Many people have died. Much blood was shed just for us to have this type of conversation in an open forum. So to keep hope alive, we need to actualize our identity, and then we need to train and teach others about their identity. Stop accepting what others tell you you are and forge your own path. Learn the journey that you want to be on. When you talk about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, life is life for anyone. I don't care where you're from. I don't care what color your skin is. The difference is the liberty part in the pursuit of happiness. Because what makes you happy, Tyrell, may not make me happy.
Right.
So when I'm telling you to keep the hope alive, let's first figure out who is Tyrell and what does he want out of life, not what someone else told them he was or told him that he should want. So it looks different. But keeping hope alive is recognizing who you are, knowing whose you are, and knowing where you're headed. When you have those three things, you can go and you can do anything.
Absolutely.
That was powerful. We'll move to Dejanay. Man, speechless. Thank you.
I would say to keep hope alive is just keep dreaming. Just keep dreaming of a better you, of a better surrounding, and just once you have that dream, you don't let anybody take it from you. Educate yourself on it, figure out a way to make it better and make it a reality. That's the best way to keep hope alive, is just to have something to look forward to. Because we don't have anything to lose. You don't have anything to look forward to. You get sucked into everything that's going on around you, get sucked into all the negativity. You start to become depressed and things of that nature. Have something to look forward to and just keep that at the forefront of your mind. And I always say, stay prayed up. I'm not sure what anybody religion is. I'm not trying to push anybody into a religion. I'm just saying whatever you do to keep you sane and to keep you positive, that's what you need to do, and you need to make it a part of your daily routine.
Absolutely. Mr. George?
I think it's achievable. I do. I think the key is, what does life mean to the Black community? And not only what does life mean for this person, what does life mean for the next person, those people that you will never, maybe never have a conversation with? Does it mean the same thing? As Dr. Burnett said, it won't mean the same thing to him as it might mean to you. What does liberty mean? Do you really understand what liberty means, or are you just basing it off of the verbiage of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And then happiness. What are you pursuing that makes you happy? Are you pursuing greed? Because if you're pursuing greed, then are you really happy? Are you pursuing envy? Does that make you happy? We have to understand what those terms mean in order to really identify, can this be achievable? And then once we understand what those things mean, we have to determine, okay, where do we as Black people fit into this? Because not everything that, as I think Miss Yvonne spoke about, this can be voted out, right? We weren't included in all of this stuff. And so when you hear this word, we have to understand that if we don't find ourselves fitting into the term of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, then we will never be able to achieve it. But we have to also understand that it has to not just be for us, but it has to be for the generation that we might not even see growing up. See what I'm saying? It has to be for those generations that might come after, we pass on and God calls us home. We have to always be forward thinking. And unfortunately, we are so focused on what we don't have that we miss out on what we do have, because we are so focused on what everybody else is doing and everything like that. So I think it's achievable, but we have to be able to place ourselves into it and see the vision behind it, so that way we can walk in the destiny that God has created for each of us.
Definitely.
I had a mom who said, my mom was amazing. She's no longer with me, but she was amazing. And one day, she said to me, the greatest obstacle you will ever face is not going to be discrimination based on your race or your gender. She said, you will always be the greatest obstacle you ever face. And at 4 years old, in fourth grade, I really didn't get that too much, but I was hell bent on writing this report and being picked as the best report. But there was this one other student. It was a young white girl. And I was like, she's probably going to write better than me. And I'm going to come in second place. And my mom said, you're not going to write this report to beat her. She said, she's not your competition. You are. And she crumbled up the paper I had written. And she said, now you bring this back to me written the way I know you can write it. And so she just talked to me about the fact that it's all in here. Mentally, we are our greatest obstacle. So if you let the world define you and tell you who you are, then that's who you're going to be. Exactly. But if you decide who you're going to be, if you decide I'm going to be an entrepreneur, despite where I came from, I'm going to be successful in spite of my upbringing. That's what can happen to you. Now, I'm not saying the road is going to be easy. I'm not going to say the journey is going to be smooth. But just like the young lady mentioned, I was raised with to have a strong relationship in God. And that's something we really did not touch upon, but that is so missing from our community, because that was the glue that held the family together once upon a time.
That's right.
And the churches.
That's
so,
right.
I'm not going to start going backwards on that, but I'm going to share this one story and I'm going to pass it on. My first month in social work, which was 2004. I asked a question to a group of my kids. I worked inside of my city's worst housing project. And I asked the young lady, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she told me, I want to move to Atlanta so I can work at Wendy's. And I said, okay, and she goes, that's it. I said, can I challenge you on something? She said, what? I said, what about moving to Atlanta and owning the Wendy's? And she said, Miss some Google searches, and I showed her some Black-owned franchises. Fast forward to about a year ago, I bumped into this young lady outside of the grocery store, and I asked her, how was she doing? She's going to business school at Florida State. Good. And she brought that conversation up. I had forgotten about it. And she said, do you remember when you told me that I could own a Wendy's? And she said, I'm going to get me my Wendy's, Miss Charlie, and a Subway's. And
I know that's right.
You just don't know. And so I'm talking to the young people. I'm talking specifically Tyrell, and I apologize for not knowing the other young lady's name. Is it Dejanay?
Dejanay.
Did I say it right? Dejanay. Okay, I was so afraid of messing it up. Dejanay, you have no idea the power you have in your voice. Mm-hmm. Not your fist, but your voice. Right. And the things that you can say to someone else to inspire them and to bring about change. And it could be something as simple as just talking to the person that is 2 feet in front of you. And helping to guide that person down a different path that they would not have normally taken had you not intercepted. I say God places us all in people's lives. So don't miss that opportunity, to turn every interaction or with that person into a teachable moment. And so I do believe that we can find happiness. I do believe that. But like George mentioned, you have to know what true happiness is. What are you truly seeking? What are you truly searching? But to just go back to what I started, we are our biggest obstacles. Once you can defeat what's going on with the mind, once you can overcome what's going on in here, you can accomplish and do anything. And I'm just going to leave it at that.
If I have a minute, I can everything that's been said, there's not much else to say. Charlie, you just said the last piece that I'm going to revert to, which is more dealing with faith, because when I hear hope, I have to go to faith and hope, and and put those as the key pieces that work together. I would say, though, I like the term I just heard recently, is creating a healthy mixture of faith and logic. We can get too caught up into certain things that we hold on to, such as faith, and we forget about the healthy mixture of logic, intellect, and things that was given, and we have to use them in the proper perspective. The only other piece I would say is don't conform. The world will push you to conform. And I'm saying, we talked about the OGs. I have to admit, there was a period, I think after the 80s, 90s, 20s, things got comfortable and complacency set in because we started conforming and we started feeling like we were entitled. Young people, don't conform and don't quit. Don't get weary in well-doing. Don't quit and don't conform to this world. do what you know in your heart of hearts and your spirit tells you to do, and fight the good fight.
Absolutely. And with that, I just want to say thank you for everybody who came out here to join us. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. It was definitely necessary, and we definitely need another part 2 of this series. But now I'd like to introduce Miss Tara Lurie, who we refer as Miss T, as a founder of the Youth World Education Project. We would not be here if it wasn't for her. Let's give her another hand.
I want to thank you all. It's so crazy how you have a vision, but again, you cannot do it by yourself.
Absolutely.
So with that being said, I just want to really thank you all for your insight and your wisdom. Across the decades is something that was needed simply because there's that intergenerational communication that's missing.
Exactly.
And this is a moment where we all have that opportunity to really listen. Not just say, well, I know this and this, that, and the other, but really listen, because in order for change to happen, it is going to take a collective effort. Not an individual, not an East Coast or West Coast, North and South. It's going to take a universal effort for change to actually happen. So thank you all again. Thank you, Charlie and George and Steve, for streaming in and just being present in this moment.
Exactly.
Our call to action, of course, is the same as the last time. Make sure you are registered to vote, but actually vote. Understand the policies and you know who these candidates are. Don't look at it based on a party. Make sure that you can connect to something, whatever that is for yourself. The census, they've extended it. Complete it. We need money in our community. If you say, oh, how come this isn't here, that's not here, it's because you're not helping. So if you're not helping, that sounds somewhat like you're part of the problem. So you can't complain in that instance. I just want to thank everyone who did stream in. Also, stay tuned for the Urban Experience 2K20 conference. So the Town Hall series was basically the pre-launch to the conference, in which we are partnered with Maricopa Community Colleges as well as the Burton Family Foundation. And it is, again, continuing, what is it, the marathon? Right, continuing the marathon. This is not an event, it's a movement. So if you follow Youth World Education Project on the social media platforms, you will also be able to see when that event is happening, and it's going to be amazing. We have a lot of workshops that's educating, empowering, and inspiring. So on that note, I thank you all, and join us for the Urban Experience 2K20 conference.
Thank you. That's a wrap.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Still streaming, just so.